Welcome. Is that good? Welcome, everybody, to the Two Stewards Show. This is super exciting because Mark is back in studio with his beard and all. So if you're not watching, I encourage you to go over to the YouTube channel and check him out. Check out the YouTube channel. I got my beard starting. So
we're getting there. We're going to get you there, Brent.
I'm an apprentice when it comes to beards of Mark, which is he's a veteran.
Yes.
So.
Good thing it's an easy skill to develop.
Yeah,
so
you just sit
have
and
to
wait
not do anything.
And not do anything. Okay. So this is now our third little episode on biblical stewardship principles. And we've talked a little bit originally about the context that we live in as Christians. We live in a world that has many sinful, evil forces. We have evil forces inside of ourselves. And then we talked about, in the next episode, about biblical stewardship principles. Mm-hmm. So some of the ideas that we pull from the Bible to help guide us when we're making our decisions, investing. And today we want to talk a little bit more about how real estate fits into the whole picture. Because real estate kind of gets a bad rap sometimes. There are certain options we can choose when we're stewarding or investing our money, right? And real estate is one of them. And both Mark and I really like real estate for good reason. But it also is a tough conversation to have because there's some ethical dilemmas, or what appears to be some ethical dilemmas around this.
False dilemmas, so call them.
False dilemmas. What do you call that? Is that just a false dilemma? I don't even know. There's a word for that. Anyways, so one of the first ones is surrounding debt and borrowing.
Yeah.
So I guess the question is, can Christians take on debt? Within a biblical framework, is debt something that we can take on?
Yeah, and that's because debt is sort of foundational to real estate investing. Yeah. And I think we've established... If
you want to buy a house in today's world, let's say it's $500,000 to go low. You got to have that kind of cash lying around to buy a house. That's going to be basically impossible.
Yeah, some people do.
Yeah, some people.
Yeah. But, I guess just to maybe recap or to give a quick bit of context, like if you're listening, we figure that real estate is the best investment tool for the average person, better than stocks or mutual funds or, maybe with the exception of starting your own business. And we've talked about that as well, right? That's just not for everybody.
Yeah. And if you're talking about the average person,
I know a lot of average people who started businesses. Having your own business doesn't make you like an above average person.
Yeah, it's a lot of struggles.
Yeah, exactly. But it can also be a vehicle for wealth creation.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about that later. Maybe wealth versus money. But, for short of having your own business, real estate is, I think, like you said, best thing for the average person to get into. And then, that depends on where you are. We're talking, in our context, North America specifically.
Yeah.
And a lot of that revolves around leverage, right? In the first few episodes, we talked about 7 different reasons why real estate is a superior investment vehicle. And one of those is leverage, and that involves borrowing. So to your point, you said if somebody has $500,000 laying around to buy a house, which is what you need in some countries, right? There's just no financing. You want to buy a house, you pay cash for it. So it's, a whole different system. But here, right, you would kind of be foolish probably to buy a house in cash if you had that $500,000 sitting around. Right, you could buy 2, 3, 4 houses, depending on the down payments you need to put down, and create more streams of income in more equity growth.
Yeah.
And if you're listening to this and you haven't listened to some of the other ones, maybe to understand the concept of leverage, go back to I don't know what episode it would be, like 3, 4, 5. But to understand how leverage works, when it's properly properly applied, and how, like, what a benefit that can be. So, but that then takes us to the question, can Christians borrow?
Yeah.
And for me, that was never really an issue until, I talked to I've had discussions with people, or just seen discussions where people
online.
Online generally, because that's where I like to do most of my arguing. Right. Can Christians borrow?
Yeah.
And people who are against that would say, they'll quote something like Deuteronomy 15 verse 6, you will lend to many nations, but you will not borrow. And that was like a prophecy about Israel's wealth. And they'll say, like, see, borrowing is bad, right? Lending, okay, borrowing, not okay.
Yeah.
And like, I think that's a pretty simplistic view. And again, we talk about sort of proof texting, right? Like pulling a text or two and saying, like, hey, this is, I draw this conclusion because that's what it says in this text. And maybe there's another one to back that up, right? But read the whole Bible and get context.
What do we learn?
So to me, it's kind of a simplistic view. Because, we read like Psalm 37, the wicked borrows but does not pay back. So it doesn't say the wicked borrows and then that's it. He borrows with the intent of not paying back. That's wicked, right?
Well, that Deuteronomy 15 passage, it's kind of like a blessing, because the Lord is blessing the nation of Israel and saying, well, the Lord your God will bless you as he's promised, and you shall lend to the nations, but you shall not borrow. So it's almost looked at on, you should be in a position of power over the nations, right? Like you should be in an advantageous position. Then like following that statement, it says you shall rule over many nations. They shall not rule over you.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And that's interesting, because if you look at the United States, for example, that's what they've done. They have lent to many nations, and now they exert economic, and maybe not military, but it's implied, but they exert economic control over these nations.
Yeah.
And like I was thinking about Solomon, I am sure that Solomon and the Israelite kingdom were net lenders to nations around them.
Yeah.
And, you read about all these tributes coming in and, their military might, but certainly that would have also been economic power by the fact that they lend. Because when someone owes you money, now you can influence their politics, their whatever, much more easily, right? Because you kind of got them.
Yeah. You see that in China too today, right?
Yeah, prime example.
We have one listener from China. So shout out to... that's a small percentage of the population of China.
It was probably an accident.
Okay. But no, they're a nation where they're using their economic influence and lending to nations, right? And debting other nations as a means to have power over them as well, right?
Yeah, and I mean, to be fair, I think they're just following the U.S.'s example, right? People talk about like, oh, they're weaponizing debt and economics and stuff, and they are, but U.S. has been doing it for a long time.
Yeah.
Let's not, let's be honest here. But Proverbs 22 talks about the rich rules over the poor and the borrower becomes the lender's slave. So, caution is advised when borrowing. Jesus...
Because slavery is a pretty harsh reality, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But that's essentially exactly what it can be. And you think of like some of the payday loan places too, right? People can become very quickly enslaved with these horrendous rates that they have to pay once they get into that cycle. But Jesus told parables as well about borrowers and lenders, and generally he was pretty harsh on the lenders, not on the borrowers. So again, most of these were not
for treating the borrowers unfairly or poorly or...
Yeah, for taking advantage of them through the lending. And again, the lesson isn't always just about economics in these parables, but it's also illustrative of society and kind of what he thought about lending and borrowing, and he accepted that as a normal course of fact in Israel. So I think you can kind of deduce from reading all these many things that that borrowing in the right context is okay. Borrowing with the intent not to pay back, that's evil.
Yeah,
that's not right. And then we were talking about Romans 13 as well, because that's another one that people will use. And I don't know if Dave Ramsey uses this one specifically, but a lot of people who follow Dave Ramsey would, right? Owe no one anything.
Yeah.
And you had some thoughts about that.
Yeah. So, owe no one anything. If you just take that statement at face value, right, that seems to basically say, okay, I shouldn't take on debt. And this, let me just pull up the passage here. What was it? Romans
13 verse 8.
Yeah. Good context here. So this is following on a passage that talks about, our how we owe different things to different authorities. We owe taxes to the government, for example, right? We owe respect, honor. We have to be submissive. So all these debts that are outstanding in our lives, we have to pay. And then it comes to verse 8 and it says, owe no one anything. So it says, okay, well, you have to pay all those debts that you have to, for example, the government, and you have to pay your taxes, right? You can't avoid doing that. But after you've paid your taxes, that debt is gone, right? Mm-hmm. Like you paid your taxes, you don't have another tax bill till next year. Okay, well, that debt is extinguished. But it makes a comment, so owe no one anything except to love each other, right? So the idea is that the only outstanding debt in your life should be the debt to love, because you can never cancel the debt to love somebody, right? That's the fulfillment of the law. If you say, okay, I've loved that person enough, that debt is done, right? I've loved my neighbor today. I helped this lady cross the street, and now I don't owe her anything. Like,
yeah, if I see her struggling tomorrow, I already did it.
Yeah,
sorry,
we did
lady.
it this year. Next year we'll help her again. We'll get some groceries. So that's what it's tackling, right? It's saying, okay, you shouldn't have debts outstanding in your life to all these other areas, but the debt that you can never cancel or get rid of is the debt to love. So that kind of takes it out of context when you say we should not borrow at all, right? Because it assumes that you're going to have other debts, right? You owe somebody honor, you owe somebody respect, you owe the taxes to the government. You have various debts, and it's acknowledging that. Yeah. But it's just acknowledging that you can never pay the debt to love. So, anyways, that just says basically it doesn't say we cannot borrow. It just provides a little bit of a framework for that we do have to pay down our debts.
Yeah, and the overarching concept is always like we're slaves to Christ. Don't be slaves to anything else. So if you're putting yourself in a bad situation where you're a slave to somebody because you owe them all this money, like that's a bad idea, right? Another text that I've heard, James 4 around verse 13, don't presume on God's will for the future. So then people say, so that would include borrowing. Yeah. Because you're presuming that he is going to bless whatever you're doing with that money. So I guess so. But then we couldn't do anything in life, right? You can't make any then you could not make any plans because you're presuming on, I shouldn't go to work today because I'm presuming on
that's
God's
the passage
will.
that says,
I'm making money.
Today or tomorrow I will go into such and such a city and I will do business and I will make a profit. Yep. And you're basically presuming that it's all in your power and control to do these things. You have the wherewithal within yourself to make these decisions and to execute them, and you do not need God's guidance or providence or blessing to make a profit and to exactly. So don't
you still have to act, and that's pretty clear throughout the Bible, right? If you don't work, you shouldn't eat. So again, a little bit taken out of context, I think, right? You have to understand really what that passage is saying, like you said, right? It's your
that passage in particular
motivation
is talking as well about boasting, right? If you're arrogant in your presumption, you're saying, look, I will do this, and me, and in my own power, I will go and not considering that, no, you are but a mist, and your life can be taken away. And do we get issues with the camera?
No, we're good. We're good.
And everything is in God's control. So another comment too is that we should, debt is not specifically condemned, but we still have wisdom to glean from the Bible around, do not take on useless expenses, for example, right? Like if you're just taking on a debt, and we've talked about this before too. So for example, buying a car, right? We use debt to buy things that are not assets in our lives, right? So if you take on debt to just go to the Bahamas on a vacation, I want to say that's a useless expense, but at the same time, that's not necessarily.
Have you been to the Bahamas,
No,
Brent?
I haven't.
Okay, maybe you go there before you say that.
Yeah. This is coming from a guy with a big beard, much bigger than me. So obviously, have you been to the Bahamas?
No.
Oh.
Sorry, but I don't want to judge.
Yeah. Okay. But I'm just saying, there's things that are in our lives that can be tempting to purchase that are frivolous or useless. That are really self-serving, and taking on debt to buy those things, that's something that we can safely say, that's something that should be avoided, right?
Yeah, and can you pay it back? Number one, it's a lifestyle thing.
Yeah.
And number two, can you pay it back? Are you taking on that debt without intention of paying it back?
Yeah, and part of the reason somebody might do that, make that decision, is you want to be perceived as somebody who has money.
Yeah.
Right. And so then your motivation for making those purchases is self-serving. You're making an idol of yourself or money. So another thing too is, I guess hinge onto that is just to be careful to take on, that you don't take on debts that you don't have the power to discharge.
Yeah.
And that ties into real estate as well, because if you're buying an asset that has a source of income attached to it, then you do, in a sense, have power to discharge that debt, right? You have an asset that's secured against it. You have an income stream that helps to pay for it. So if you run the numbers properly, and if you make a wise decision when you're buying, you should have, in many instances, the power to discharge the debt, right? So you're not just frivolously buying something that, where are you going to get the money to pay for it?
Yeah, and it's part of the bank's due diligence as well. They underwrite the deal, right? And they actually own the asset.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? Like you're accruing all the benefits, but if you have a mortgage, they own that asset.
Yeah.
So, you could, looking at that, it's pretty clear that you're not entering into a contract with the intent of not paying it back.
Well, and that's an
there's
argument
a plan
for not taking on debt too, right? You don't actually own your house until it's paid for.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could apply that to a personal residence as well, right?
Yeah.
Wait until you have the money to buy it in cash, and as we've seen lately,
or pay it off as quickly as possible.
Well, I mean, if you really want to be dogmatic about it. That reminds me of our Obelix and Asterix and Obelix conversation. Dogmatix was the little dog.
Yeah.
But if you want to be dogmatic about it, right, you shouldn't buy a house until you have the cash to pay for it.
Yeah.
And the problem is that, today, you will never buy a house because your ability to save versus inflation will probably outpace your ability to save up for that house.
Yeah.
Not to say, we should have principles when it comes to buying and borrowing, and that should determine our action, not always practical matters, but just pointing that out. that you'll never get into a house if that's your attitude. But the whole point is that this is it's a contract between you and the lender, and they own the property, and generally speaking, they will be made whole even if you default. Like if you can't for some reason pay, they're not going to lose out because they retain the asset, right? And they're only, especially with an investor, right? You're going to put 20% of your money down.
Yeah.
So there's at least that amount of equity in the property.
Yeah.
So that if the bank has to take it back,
And when you say equity, that's actually real savings that you've saved up, right? It's not, because when you put up down payment, I guess you could borrow that from somewhere else. But the idea is that in the lender's eyes, that's actual money.
Well, even let's say you did borrow from somewhere else, that's still real money from somewhere.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, we can get into like fractional reserve banking.
We should.
We've talked about that before. We don't have to get into the purposes of this discussion. But the point is there's money down, there's real capital that's been invested, and that provides a safeguard for the lender, and that generally continues. If you never refinance, that only gets better and better.
Yeah.
So that you're not engaging in a contract that you cannot fulfill.
Yeah.
Right. I guess because there's two things that would be wrong taking on debt. One would be doing it with the intent of not paying it back, and then doing it with maybe not the intent, but like foolishly a chance that you're not going to be able to pay it back.
Yeah.
Right. And that is not what happens in real estate. When you invest properly, right? It is possible, and we've seen it like the great financial crisis, where everybody got a little bit crazy and they're lending based on nothing. And
that's a speculation too, right? So we want to be able to avoid speculating in excess and any kind of rash decision, especially when you're buying a property, right? Like you don't want to make a quick, flippant decision with no data or due diligence, or in the context of borrowing, a good method of paying that debt back, right? Because whenever your decision you make, once the deal closes or once you have the property, that could expose you to a situation where you can't, in the words of Romans 13, like render to all their due, right? Yeah. So you're as a Christian, your goal is to pay everyone back, right? And that's a biblical thing. But if you put yourself rashly into a position where you can't and overextend, then that's not wise. No. So, and that's, you have to do, you have to be educated. You have to do your research, right? Plan slowly and act quickly. Yeah. Sometimes you may need to make a decision, but you need to have all that work done in the background beforehand so that you are quick and rash, I guess, are two different things, right? If you're prepared and you're prudent in your preparations and planning, then you can make a quick decision, but it's not a rash decision where you're not properly judging all of the different outcomes and evaluating whether or not one's going to be more likely or
So I don't know. I think that kind of
so we can take on debt, Mark.
prudently. But I think that kind of addresses the whole borrowing thing to me, anyways. Right? Yeah. I know some people may not be convinced.
Yeah, we don't have as high an intellect as you do, so it's hard.
Who? Where? Intellect, it's common sense, I think. Yeah. But to me, that kind of puts the borrowing thing to bed, right? You have to approach it from a biblical perspective, and as opposed to that's just how it works. Yeah. Right. That's not a good approach either. No. Right. You can't just be like, well, that's how it works, and everybody else is doing it. Yeah. Right.
Follow like sheep.
Yeah. Exactly.
Well, that gets us into the Christian ethics or ethics surrounding real estate investing. So, and specifically, I want to focus on the word investors, right?
It's terrible investors.
Are investors bad? And are they causing a housing shortage? That is, I think, a more common argument. I haven't heard so much that debt is necessarily bad. Like parts of different debt, what we talked about, not being able to pay it back. Okay, that's a fairly common argument. But I guess you hear more about how, especially in the news, how investors are bad. They're buying houses. Homeowners can't afford them, right? So they're driving up the prices of these houses, and that's not right, especially for Christians to partake in.
Yeah.
So what do we say to that? That's a big question.
The first thing we talked about borrowing comes from a Christian perspective. And although I disagree with it, that is somebody like doing what they're supposed to do, going to the Bible and getting guidance there. Right? The second argument about investors are bad and they're driving up costs of houses and stuff doesn't come from a Christian perspective. Yeah. And I'm sorry if you think that it does. It doesn't. Yeah. Right? It comes from Marxism, from identity politics, from sort of the new zeitgeist that we have in our culture. And we talked about this a little bit before about zero-sum math, where basically
we gotta explain zero sum again.
Okay. Well,
I can never figure this out. You add things together and it equals zero.
So the idea that
that's not how it works.
No, but it's the idea that there's a finite amount of wealth, and that if somebody is becoming richer, we'll say richer. If somebody's more successful or becoming richer, then they must be causing someone else to become poorer. Yeah. And I think we pretty well disproved that in
it's the pie, right? There's one pie. It has X number of pieces.
Yeah.
If this guy has all of them, all those other people have none.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he is directly affecting the quality of their life.
Yeah.
Right. And we talked about that, and it's like, it's not true. The pie has gotten bigger over the years.
Yeah, because that's the other way to look at it, right?
Yeah.
You could look at it as if it's a zero sum, as if one gets at the other at the expense of others.
Yeah.
Or the other way is the pie gets bigger.
Yeah, and that, like, I'm sorry, it's just reality.
Yeah.
The pie gets bigger.
Yeah.
Through trade, through commerce. The pie gets, and I'm not, we're not talking about the money supply, the amount of money in the economy, because that has gotten bigger too, and that's actually the problem we're talking about. But right, but in terms of real wealth, right? Because we talked about like standards of living and how kings and queens lived centuries ago, and how even the poorest folks in the world.
Okay, so we can nip that in the bud right away. Like money is not wealth.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, maybe we should talk about that real quick.
Because I think the two have become synonymous today. People say, oh, that's a wealthy guy. And they basically mean he has lots of money, right?
Yeah.
Or if somebody gets lots of money, okay, he's wealthy. But that's not necessarily true, right?
No.
Because money does not equate to wealth. And I guess we could define money and wealth and take another 6 episodes. Maybe we should. But real wealth is actually the things, right? Like,
well, you could say it's hard assets.
Yeah. So, but food, for example,
yeah,
right?
Okay. Food's maybe not a hard asset, but it's an asset.
I've always heard like wealth is a measure of time.
Okay.
And what I mean is, when someone's wealthy, it's how long can you sustain your current standard of living without working or producing income, right? So obviously you need goods and services to live, right? You need a house to live in, you need food to eat. So those things cost money, right? But if you're wealthy, you would be able to have those things and not have the income side of it, like not go to work and expend. So I don't know, does that illustrate it?
Yeah, I think it does. Because if you're subsistence farming or living on a subsistence level, you are not wealthy. You can last one day or half a day without having to go work.
Yeah. But then it also means, too, that real wealth is those things that we need, that we need to consume, that we need to live.
Yeah.
But money is just dollars, and it's kind of a measure, and that's where I think people get confused. Is that like, for example, watermelon. You want to eat a watermelon on a hot summer day. You go to the store and it's $10, and you're like, wait a minute, last year was $5. So there might be $10 more in your pocket now, or $5 more in your pocket now, but that watermelon's the same watermelon. So at the end of the day, you might have more money in your pocket, but you're buying a watermelon, and it's not 10 times better or twice as good, right?
Yeah.
It's the exact same thing.
Yeah. Yeah. The only thing that has changed is the amount of money.
Yeah. So the real wealth is the
it.
watermelon.
Yeah.
And that's not changed. Like, you haven't become more wealthy now that you have this twice as good watermelon in your grocery cart, right? That's maybe not a great example. Watermelon's just great all the time.
Really? Okay, I'm not such a fan. My kids have it. But,
that's why you give it to kids, and they just
invest in watermelons. I think that's what you're saying.
Yeah.
But no, that's a good point, right? Wealth is not money. And sometimes having a lot of money can mean wealth. But when we talk about inflation, for example, right, having a lot of cash is not a great idea, because that will eat away at your wealth. You look like you have something to say there.
No.
Okay.
So each person, so I'm just reading this little thing from a book here. So each man sees that if he personally had more money, he could buy more things from others. If he had twice as much money, he could buy twice as many things. If he had 3 times as much money, he would be worth 3 times as much. And to many, the conclusion seems obvious, that if the government merely issued more money and distributed it to everybody, we should all be that much richer. All right, end of podcast.
So that is Economics in One Lesson by Henry Hazlitt.
Yeah. Which is a good book, by the way. We should do a
review.
Yeah.
Want to do a book club, Brent?
Yeah, we should do. Anyone want to join the book club? Reach out. Hello at Two Stewards.
There you go. But no, he wrote this, I think, what did we say, 46 originally, and then republished in the late 60s. It's good stuff. But that illustrates a point, though, right? Money is not wealth, and printing more money.
Yeah.
Right. If you think money is wealth, then printing more money, everybody should be wealthier. But that's not true.
But even not just printing the money, even thinking if you had twice as much money, right? That doesn't equate to wealth, because if somebody had twice as much money, but there were no other things to buy with that money, he wouldn't be wealthy. He would just. That's the point they're making, right? Is that wealth is the stuff. So if there is no stuff, or the stuff, for example, is poor quality.
Yep.
Right. So he wants to go out and buy something better. Like, let's say he's, what's a good example? Let's say an axe. Okay. He's a lumberjack, because you're
I like this.
You look like a lumberjack. Well, he wants a better axe, but there is no better axe. He's already at the peak. He has the best axe out there, but he has all this money and he wants a better axe. He can't get it.
Right.
So is he wealthy, or does he just have a lot of money? Right. And that's the difference between the two. Trying to illustrate it, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that makes sense. And so, really it's about assets. And like, we're talking about wealth here, right? We understand that true wealth is not
of this world.
Of this world. We get that, but now we're talking specifically about some lessons for this world. So, we're talking wealth. So it's assets. And so that leads me to asset inflation, right? When the government prints money, when they put more money into the economy, what happens to assets? They go up in, we'll say they go up in value, right? So an asset, it could be a Rolex watch, a piece of art, it could be a house. That's what primarily we're talking about here. Yeah. The house, and we've seen how houses...
You don't sound excited by this. Is this a good thing or a bad thing if this happens?
No, it's a bad thing.
Okay.
Right? We've seen the value of houses skyrocket in the last 10 years, right? In this area, probably triple. Yeah. It's maybe a little bit less.
It was more. Price of them went up.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
the
sorry.
value-
Okay. You're right. The price went up. In some cases, quadruple over 10 years. And then we're just back down to like triple now. So, terrible, right? The bubble has crashed. But, why? And now people, like 10 years ago, people weren't really talking about the housing crisis.
Yeah.
Right? There were some people who were like advocates for homeless and so forth who would have been. But now it's popular to talk about this because now it's affecting middle class people. Right?
Yeah.
Once you hit middle class,
everybody cares.
Everybody cares.
Yeah.
Right. And there's a little bit something shameful about that too. But, the argument is that investors have caused this, right? Well, investors were doing the same thing that they're doing now 10 years ago, 20 years ago,
Since
100
Mark
years
was
ago.
born hundreds of years ago. Since the time of the Romans and the Spanish galleons.
Exactly. But I mean, if we want to bring it into our context of sort of Western civilization in the last 100 years, whatever, right? Investors haven't really changed their, strategies have changed.
Okay, what is an investor? Because it's almost taken this, investor is a bad word, or it's a bad person, like an investor, and is that founded upon anything?
I mean, I think you know what I'll say. No.
Yeah.
Right. An investor is just someone who has excess capital.
Yeah.
That chooses.
So that's the first criteria, is they have something extra that they want to do something with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, you can have people who maybe are facilitating deals and, they don't actually have the money, but they'll bring in a partner who has the money and they have the expertise. But let's just keep it simple. Yeah, they have some capital that they're going to invest in something.
Yeah.
And that something has been housing, right? Especially in Canada. It's a huge part of our economy. And for good reason, because of inflation we've been talking about, right? The increase in the money supply has directly led to the increase in the price of assets.
Yeah.
And specifically homes. And that is the number one, by far and away, that is the biggest contributor to housing prices, right? There's actual supply and demand.
Inflation, you mean?
Inflation.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. There is supply and demand, especially in Southern Ontario. We've always had strong immigration and people moving into the area and a lack of houses. Right. And there's tons of data to support this. Right. We've never been able to keep up with the amount of houses that we need to build. And that deficit of housing just keeps getting bigger and bigger every year. Right. So that's one thing. People now are looking at immigration now that the numbers got very big very quickly, saying whoa, we got to stop this inflation. It's causing housing prices to spike. It's guys, housing prices have been the last 10 years, especially. We didn't have mass immigration like we did. It's been building in the background.
Yeah.
Nobody was paying attention. You're seeing the effects now, but that, immigration isn't the cause. Immigration doesn't help. And when I say immigration, I'm talking about massive numbers of people that we don't have the infrastructure or housing to support, right? So yeah, you have supply and demand, you have immigration, but primarily it is inflation, right? That causes the price of homes to go up. And we've talked about this in other episodes, I don't need to beat it to death. But to take a simplistic view that landlords are causing, it doesn't even make sense. How is a landlord causing...
Well, you look at it, I guess, a simplistic view. If you see some, let's say there's a house that comes up for sale. Yeah. And in your neighborhood. And they're showing it for a week, and then they have offers on the Monday. Yeah. Or let's say the Friday, because that's a nice day.
Sure.
So they have offers on Friday. And all these people have seen the house and they're accepting offers, and then they get 10 offers, and 3 of them are from investors and 7 of them are from homeowners. Mm-hmm. And then the investor gets the house, right? A simplistic view would say, well, the investor who already has a house, presumably, he might not, but his intention is to not live there or to use it as an income stream or an asset in his life. So the investor has bought that house, which is the scarce asset that everybody wants, at the expense of those other 7, or the other 2 investors, and the other 7 families, 5 of which have just recently immigrated here to Canada and don't have anything going for them. So they need a place.
Yeah.
So is that fair? Like, that is what they look like, what people look at, right? They see what happened on the weekend down the street, and they see that the investor now has it, and they say, well, that's not fair. So what do you say to that?
So
because that makes it real, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And like, I think it's hogwash, but to put it very subtly. No, but I'll tell you why, right? The immigrants, generally speaking, right, unless they're wealthy immigrants, they cannot afford to buy a house now anyways.
Yeah.
As a result of asset inflation.
Yeah.
And like general monetary policy, right? They don't have a chance. So yeah, you do hear stories of these bidding wars and stuff. So I don't have all that data. And we've talked about how an investor may be willing to pay more than ask if they run the numbers and understand that, especially now we have some different rules around intensification. So they may see the potential to add a backyard unit, right? Which would make it worth it for them to pay a little bit more. But I'm not convinced that all the frenzied bidding wars were investors, right? If you're an investor, and I'm not saying every investor behaves rationally, but you have a number. And once you go past that number, it does, you can't do it. Right? It doesn't make sense. So you would be a fool to do it. And most investors, not only that, they may not qualify for financing. If they go over their budget, right? So homeowners, on the other hand, and I've read numerous, and this is all anecdotal, but I've read numerous stories of homeowners who, we're on our 20th offer, right? And we just keep offering more and more and more and more. And all the bidding wars and stuff, my contention is that's probably homeowners bidding up the prices like that, not investors. Investors may bid it up to a certain level, but then that's it. And certainly, just looking at my neighborhood, the houses that went for $1 million or more, and we're talking a 3-bedroom bungalow, probably with a finished basement, there's homeowners living there. In the examples that I can think of, it's not investors. It's the people who bought it that are right. So
but I think the argument too is that if investors were to not bid on the house, then a homeowner would get it and they wouldn't have to bid so high, right?
I don't.
And then it's more equitable because everybody would own a house who wants to own a house. That's what we should pursue.
But I mean, everybody wants a nice car. Everybody wants, I don't know. Everybody should have a nice pickup. Well, everybody can't. And that's just because they cost a certain amount. And, I would like a rocket ship as well, but I can't afford one. Some people can. It's not fair that Elon Musk has all the rocket ships and I don't. Right? It's kind of an argument like that. The price is what it is, mainly determined by inflationary.
I guess the difference there too is
spending.
that houses are kind of a human need, right? Well, we need a place to live. So then shouldn't you care whether or not someone can afford a place to live?
So it you're right. So then investors should buy all the houses.
Why?
Because investors are much more likely to provide more housing for more people, as opposed to that family who's going to move into the bungalow and use the whole thing selfishly for themselves, right? Or maybe it's like an old couple who only needs 1 bedroom, but they're buying a 3-bedroom place. Because they've downsized from something else, right? We don't look at all that stuff, but why should they do that when there's that immigrant family? If you really want to be about the poor immigrant families, and I'm talking tongue in cheek here.
Yeah.
Right. I have nothing against poor immigrant families, but if you're genuinely that concerned about people, then you should let investors buy up all the houses, because who provides housing?
Yeah.
Investors, right?
Yeah.
You said that earlier in a conversation with one of your clients, right? Homeowners don't provide housing. They provide housing for them. They acquire housing for themselves.
Yeah. They
Investors build more housing,
Yeah.
generally speaking.
Yeah.
And like, especially when you talk about intensification, which is every investor that we know is at least thinking about it with the properties that they have. And what that does is create more housing for people.
Yeah.
So whether somebody owns it or not, it's kind of immaterial. If you're like, there's a housing crisis, we need to get people into houses.
Yeah.
We don't need...
Everyone needs to own them.
Yeah, does everybody need... I think there's great value in people owning their own home.
Yeah.
But if you're taking that argument, then it should just be about getting as many people into housing as possible. And then your answer is to let investors provide that, because as we've said previously, investors provide the housing in Canada, the vast majority.
Yeah.
Government
So when the
does
government
not.
says we will produce or provide housing for how many homes is it in the next 10 years they're going to build?
I don't know. I can't. It was like hilarious. I don't know if it was like 100,000 or
Hilarious
something.
amount. Yeah.
Yeah, basically. We lost a video here.
Okay. There we go.
Yeah, a hilarious amount.
Just a hilarious.
Well, that once more. It's not hilarious. You got to hit the button once more there, Brent. Not hilarious in context, but if you're just looking at it sort of abstractly, we need, I can't remember how many million houses.
Yeah, 1.5 million.
Yeah, that even CMHC has done some work on it. It said we need this many houses, and the government's like, we're going to build, 5% of that.
Yeah.
Right.
But I guess the point is that the government itself doesn't have framers and excavators and whatever on staff to build the houses.
Yeah.
So how do they build houses?
Well, they print money.
Yeah.
Essentially, because they don't have the money.
Yeah.
So they take future tax dollars.
Yeah.
And overpay generally for because of their own silly bureaucracy.
For other people who are in the labor market.
Yeah.
To build the houses.
Correct.
So they're constrained by the amount of money they can borrow.
Yep.
Which is not really a constraint in the government's case.
Yep.
And by the amount of supplies and labor they can come up with, which those are actually limits, constraints, right? Like they can't just produce people to work unless they, like we're doing, getting immigrants into the country, right?
Yeah, but bringing in immigrants isn't bringing in, that's not producing framers.
No, not necessarily. Right? Like maybe 1% of them are framers or whatever.
Out of 0%.
Yeah, 0%.
North America's
but
really
the problem
the only
is you
place
bring in a person, and even if they are working, they still need a house to live in. So now you just got your problem even worse.
What do you do? Build your own house?
Yeah.
It's not that worked in pioneer days.
Yeah.
Right? And that's what they did, right?
Yeah.
Go out here in some cases.
Well, you could build your own house if we didn't have a building code.
Yeah,
or zoning policies.
Yeah, exactly.
Anything, right?
But they would give out land and be like, here, you have this land and do whatever you want.
Your house
with
falls
it.
down, and
it's
on you.
So that worked. Pioneer days. We're not pioneer days anymore.
Good old throwback.
But that also illustrates part of the problem. The government is going to do something, okay? So they need to borrow. They're not spending money they have.
Yeah.
To build these houses.
I was getting to the point that they need investors. They need somebody else in the private sector to take action to actually construct the homes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But I have a different point, which is they are borrowing money to build these houses.
Yeah.
It's not money that they have sitting around because of their excellent
between our two very crazy brains, very smart brains, we've come up with two reasons why the government's plan to build more houses is a bad thing.
Well, yes, the problem is, right, and you look at the states and the amount of money that is going just towards interest payments.
Yeah.
which means they can't spend it on other things.
Yeah.
And an increasing number of prominent investors, politicians, economists are saying, like, something's got to give. Like, we're going to have to do something real soon, because the debt will soon be taking up like up to 50%.
Just the payments, just for the interest.
The interest payments on the debt are going to take up a huge amount of the budget every year.
Yeah.
Which
Otherwise,
means we can't spend it on entitlements, infrastructure,
housing,
veterans, whatever else, right? So the point is, when the government has a program to do something, they're actually making it worse, because they're borrowing money they don't have. They're creating more. What do? They print more money. Well, when we print more money, we increase the price of assets.
Yeah.
And they're not just doing it with housing, they're doing it with everything, right? But it's just this spiral.
Yeah.
And how do you not see this, people? The price of housing is going to continue to spiral, because because
the value of the dollar.
We have a fiat problem.
Yeah.
The value of the dollar is going to continue to decrease, because they have to print more money to service the debt.
Yeah.
That's the only way out of this, is to print more money and to get ever increasing amounts of debt.
Like, if they don't service the debt, what happens? You default.
Well,
that's not good.
Yeah. So default is the worst,
because that's their two
scenario.
options, right? We're looking at the government's options. They could either print money or not pay the debts. And that's it's a strong possibility. I think default is inevitable in one way, shape, or form, right? Like, essentially 1971, with the abolition of the gold standard, that was a default. Yeah.
I never thought about that, but somebody made that point. Like, actually they defaulted on their obligations.
Yeah.
And there are defaults all the time. We don't realize it. But you could say that every time they reach the debt ceiling and have to print more money, that's kind of a default.
Yeah, that just recently happened, right, in the States.
Yeah, every year it's this big political thing. But every time you have to massively increase the money supply, you're sort of defaulting on the obligations you have, because you're watering it all down, making it worse. But point is, it's a big snowball. It's a spiral. It's a snowball in a spiral.
Ooh,
that's you don't want to be you don't want to be in the path of that. I'm making light of it, but for people who think that investors are the ones responsible for driving up house prices, absolutely not. And go back 10 years, nobody would have predicted. Actually, some people did predict house prices were going to be where they were.
Yeah.
Some people are predicting that it's going to continue in lockstep with the amount of government debt that is out there. And I see no reason why that is incorrect. People are calling for, there's going to be a crash in house prices. Like, how?
Yeah.
The amount of money in our society is not going to decrease.
Yeah.
And not the amount of wealth, the amount of money, the amount of dollars.
Yeah.
Right? It's going to increase. It has to increase.
Yeah.
Mathematically speaking.
Well,
and
I don't know,
house prices
talked about it before, but like the value of the house doesn't really change.
No.
It's the nominal price.
At some point, I think the value of a single family detached home will actually increase just by the fact that it's scarce.
Yeah.
And that nobody will be able to have the fiat dollars.
I don't say the value doesn't change at all, but the value changes very, very slowly and small compared to, like when you compare it to the change in the price of it, right? So, for example, the value of a residential lot in a neighborhood with a detached, like a single family home on it. That might change slowly over time as more people want to live in that area. The trees grow taller and the school gets better, and maybe you do some improvements, and now it's a nice, desirable house to live in. So it's a little bit more valuable.
Yeah.
Maybe that value jumps up in steps as the city says, well, now you can have a legal basement apartment in your house, so now you can produce income from this property. So somebody buying it can say, okay, I'm going to put a little bit of extra money into the basement, and now now the value went up, right? Because you could say that's the value. But the price goes up a lot faster than the value And those two things, I guess you have to kind of, you can't really separate them because it's hard to do the math. Like you just see the price change, right?
Yeah.
You don't see the underlying value so much.
Yeah, but I think there will be a point at which, like, it will be an anomaly to own a home.
Yeah.
Never mind 2 or 3 or 4 homes, right? Right. Like right now, yeah, not a lot of people own homes. Like a lot of people own homes, a lot of people don't. You can get there eventually. At some point, it's just going to be unattainable.
If the current trends continue, right? If the government keeps printing money, and if
at some point, I think it'll be just unattainable to ever buy a house unless you already have them. And that's at that point, I think the value goes up because there's always a chance now to buy one. Eventually, like if you don't have one, you're not going to get one. Yeah. And then it's absolute scarcity. But we got a little bit off topic there again. But
what just on investors, right? Because we're talking about investors bad. Well, what about the situation where a homeowner buys a house?
Yeah.
And then they put a basement apartment in?
Yeah. Now they're an investor.
Yeah.
Right? Like people talk about, no, we should support homeowners.
What makes them an investor?
What's that?
What makes them an investor? Like they're still living in the house. Like how would you say,
Well, they've taken capital and they've invested that. They've risked it on something to produce a future gain.
Yeah. They're making a sacrifice. Their living space got half as big as before.
Well, I mean, maybe they never used the basement too, right?
Yeah.
It's possible.
And they had the option to.
Well, actually, I know more young couples like that who have bought a house with an unfinished basement. Like that's, sort of your typical move, right? You buy the house with the unfinished basement. I think you did the same thing, right? You slowly finish that basement.
Yeah. It was,
so you're investing your time, your labor, your money.
Onerous process, that finishing and living in the basement.
Well, of course, you're the owner. It would be onerous. Dad joke of the day.
You got to stick around to the end, folks.
But yeah, like as soon as you do that, when you're trading your time, effort, money, and improving the asset, and now making a place for someone else to live, you're an investor.
Yeah.
So whether it's an investor buying that home and densifying it, and he doesn't live there, or you buy it and you live there and you intensify it, like you're still an investor.
Yeah.
So anybody who rents out their basement apartment, essentially you're an investor, right? Even if you bought the house finished, like you paid a premium for that finished basement apartment to rent it out. So considering the amount of people that actually do that, like it's a lot more investors than we thought. Doesn't mean you're going out to buy a second home, but can you make a distinction that you didn't buy another property? Like you still provided another living space for someone.
Yeah. Yeah. Right? Yeah. And there was costs and sacrifice involved in creating that. Okay. Man, we put all kinds of arguments to bed here.
I hope so. I mean,
now I can go to bed. All right.
But we should probably wrap up there because that's like an hour.
Okay.
And I'm sure people are falling asleep by now.
All right.
So, what did we talk? We talked about borrowing. We talked about investors. That's really all we talked about.
Yeah.
But not bad and not the boogeyman. Those are my conclusions. So thank you for listening, folks. We hope to catch you on the next episode.
When
Check
my
out.
beard's a bit longer.
Yeah, I mean, follow along, right? It's going to be painstaking.
Oh, shoot.
But month by month, week by week, that beard's going to get longer. But if you have questions, hit us up at twostewards, twostewards.ca. Is it .ca?
Hello at.
Well, you can go to the website and get us from there. Yeah. And we're happy to chat with you. So till next time, steward your wealth wisely.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Two Stewards Show. If you like my voice better, click subscribe.
And if you like my voice better, click share.
If you like both, give us a 5-star rating.
To interact with the show, feel free to reach out at hello@twostewards.ca.
We'll see you in the next episode. In the meantime, steward your wealth wisely.